A price war has erupted over cheap flights, with prices for a one-way ticket between Sydney and Melbourne dropping to as low as $30. Joining us live is aviation expert Geoffrey Thomas. Jeff, good to see you. Thanks for your time. Airlines taking these pretty desperate measures to entice people back onto their planes.
Look, yes, this fare war has been brewing for quite some time with the new entrant Rex as far as jet operations are concerned. Of course, they're a well-established regional player. But yes, they've muscled in on the golden triangle, if you like, of aviation in this country, the Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane area, and the sparks have been flying ever since. What they're saying now is that, there's been lots of exciting fares from Sydney to the Gold Coast and Melbourne to the Gold Coast and other places. But between Melbourne and Sydney, the fares have not been as exciting, and they've come into the market with a $39 fare, which is quickly matched by Virgin and then undercut by Jetstar at $30. So amazing time for anybody who wants to travel between Melbourne and Sydney.
But a very different story, isn't it, Jeff, for Aussies trying to get home from, well, most places overseas. They're saying that the costs of getting an airline ticket into Australia are really quite prohibitive for most. I mean, we're hearing stories of people saying if you actually want a guaranteed spot from, say, the UK or the US, you need to book a business class flight because the economy flights just keep getting bumped. Is that right? What's behind it? Is it all to do with the caps?
Look, it's all to do with the cap. The issue is that, you've got aeroplanes like the Boeing 777, the Airbus A350. They're 350, 400-seat aeroplanes. And when the cap is 30 or 40 passengers, unless the airlines are charging business class fares, they're making a massive loss. So, the airlines have been struggling with these caps that have been going up and down as the government responds to the COVID issues. They obviously, they'd be really happy if they broke even, but they're losing an enormous amount of money on some of these flights, and they simply cannot afford to operate charging just economy fares for 20 or 30 passengers. So it's a very, very vexing problem. One could argue the government should step in and subsidise some of these fares if they are indeed putting the cap on, which is correct. It's almost a no-win situation for the airlines, and they're being sort of portrayed as the villains here, where in actual fact they're simply trying to at least break even on these flights back to Australia.
Jeff, we've been having a lot of debate on the program about Australia's policy to ban flights from India. Are we the only ones doing this, or is this actually something that most developed countries around the world are doing at this point, is banning any flights in from India?
Most countries of the world have banned flights from India, and there's a couple of serious issues here. One is the emergence of fake COVID testing certificates, because you've got to have a COVID. For instance, on a recent flight between Calcutta, I think it was, and Kolkata and Hong Kong, passengers had to be checked 72 hours before, had to have a COVID test. The 180 passengers on board all had COVID-free tests. They were all free of COVID. When the plane arrived in Hong Kong, 47 passengers had tested positive for COVID-19. And Hong Kong immediately banned all flights from India. So there's a question mark about the validity of the COVID testing. We know there's fake certificates out there. Just the sheer numbers of infected passengers has put up the barriers all around the world. Even this morning, Uganda banned flights from India. So we're not alone. In fact, we were late to the party as far as this is concerned. Very grave problem. But what do you do?
Yeah, well, it's a question the government's grappling with right now. Interesting, that Hong Kong story, Jeff. I mean, that's something that the WA Premier Mark McGowan raised last week as well, this idea that there are dodgy certificates being handed out, just another issue for the government to have to get on top of. It's a different story in Europe. The EU overnight announcing that they're going to be welcoming travel from vaccinated tourists, and I guess that's the key word, isn't it? It's going to be all about the vaccine. If you want to start travelling internationally, you would have had to have had the jab.
Look, indeed, and go back about 4 or 5 months ago, and Alan Joyce copped a lot of flack from saying that if you want to fly Qantas overseas, you're going to have a jab, and there was a lot of pushback on that. But the reality is, governments are going to dictate, as we have seen with Europe, saying you're very welcome to come here. We'd love you to come here, but you have to be vaccinated. And countries like Singapore, I expect, will be saying something very similar. If you want to transit Singapore on your en route to somewhere else or come here, you're going to have a jab. And go back to the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. When you travelled overseas, you had a passport in one hand and a vaccine book, a vaccination book in the other, and you had 4 or 5 or 6 jabs, depending on where you were going, for all sorts of exotic diseases you simply did not want to get, and you couldn't travel without it. And that's what we're facing today, is you're going to have a vaccination, or you're simply not going to be able to travel overseas at all. And that would be, I would imagine, the situation right across the globe, because as we've seen with India, this thing, it gets completely out of control, and terrible, terrible scenes and devastation. And no country wants to be in that situation. So people coming into those to different countries are simply going to have to be vaccinated, and that's it.
There are a few options, of course, for us at the moment to travel. We've got the travel bubble with New Zealand. Other countries seem to be doing their own similar sort of bubble setups. How are they working around the world? How do you see that bubble concept developing?
Oh, I think that is certainly going to be the future. Vaccinate, even with people being vaccinated, you're going to have a bubble, or you're going to have a corridor, say like between Singapore and Hong Kong, or say Singapore and Australia, here, Australia and South Korea, for instance. As countries well and truly get on top, and when they harmonise their policies and procedures with ours, then yes, we'll open up a travel bubble if and when we can. And I see that situation being the norm, I would say, for at least another 12, possibly 24 months, particularly with the experience out of India that we've seen. It's going to be quite some time before things become normal.
Geoff, just finally, we reported in this bulletin this $3.1 billion loss for Virgin Australia. Perhaps not that surprising, I guess, when you see that the statistic there that the airline was forced to reduce flying levels down to just 4.2% of previous years. I mean, we know it's bad, but when you look at 4% of previous flying, I mean, it just really is the stark reality, isn't it, that a lot of airlines have been facing?
Look, indeed, it was a devastating blow for Virgin, a crippling blow for Virgin, and of course Qantas the same thing as well. But obviously they were far better healed. But that figure is a snapshot of a moment in time, and it represented the fact that the airline was in administration. And once you go to administration, there's all sorts of additional costs, and everything has to be brought to account. And we should emphasise that Virgin came out of administration. Bain Capital paid $3.5 billion for it. Now it has a very, very solid balance sheet backed by Bain Capital, and it's a very different operation to the one that went into administration. But yes, it is a sobering snapshot of how bad things got last year for Virgin in particular, but the airline industry in general.
Geoff Thomas, always appreciate your analysis. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.